Hello there, and welcome to Forgotten Worlds. My name is Thomas, and tonight I'd like you to join me on a journey into one of Earth's most surprising secrets. When you picture the Sahara, you probably imagine endless dunes, scorching winds, and a silence so vast it swallows everything. A desert so eternal it feels like it has always been this way. But what if it wasn't? What if beneath those sands lies the memory of forests, rivers, and even empires? What if the Sahara, the largest hot desert on our planet, was once green, alive, and filled with cities? For most of us, the desert feels fixed, unchanging, and yet science tells us another story. The Sahara is young, geologically speaking, and it has not always been a desert at all. Time and again, across thousands of years, it has bloomed into grassland and savanna, fed by great rivers and vast lakes. Imagine standing where sand now burns underfoot, and instead seeing herds of cattle, crocodiles in the water, hippos wading through reeds. Imagine not emptiness, but life. Tonight, we are going to explore this forgotten chapter, the Sahara's green empire. We'll wander through the cycles of climate that turned dust to gardens, trace the buried rivers that once carved highways across Africa, and peer into the ruins of vanished kingdoms swallowed by the dunes. And as always, this is not a debate, but an exploration. We won't be rushing to conclusions. Instead, we'll move slowly, letting the wonder of what might have been guide us. So settle in. Let the noise of the day fall away, and together let's step back into a Sahara that was not barren at all, but alive, a sea of grass, water, and cities, long before the desert we know. If you were to stand at the edge of the Sahara today, looking out across its golden expanse, it would be easy to believe that it has always been this way. The dunes seem timeless, the sun unrelenting, the horizon forever hazy with dust. To the human mind, shaped by generations of memory and story, deserts feel eternal. And yet the Sahara is a child in geological time. It is not an ancient desert, but a young one, only a few million years old. For much of Earth's history, this place was something very different. Geologists, climatologists, and archaeologists now speak of the Sahara as a land that changes its face over and over again. It is not locked into dryness, but rather caught in a long rhythm, a pulse that beats with the slow turning of Earth itself. Evidence whispers this truth from the ground. Beneath the dunes lie shorelines of vanished lakes, riverbeds etched into stone, pollen grains preserved in dust that tell of forests and savannas. Imagine walking out into what we call the desert, and instead of sand, your feet press into damp soil, rich with the scent of grass. The air hums with insects. The calls of birds echo across wide valleys, and where today there are only mirages, you see real water glinting under the sun. This isn't fantasy. It has happened again and again. Scientists call these episodes the Green Sahara periods, times when rain returned, rivers flowed, and life flourished. The most recent of these green ages ended only about 5,000 years ago, which means that if we stretched human history out like a scroll, much of it would include stories lived in a Sahara that was fertile and alive. Ancient people hunted there, raised cattle, built villages, and left behind art on rock walls showing giraffes, elephants, and hippos, creatures that today can only survive far to the south. And yet here lies the contradiction that makes the Sahara so mysterious. We think of deserts as fixed, yet this desert has been undone and remade dozens of times. To the patient rhythm of Earth, it is not a desert at all, but a shifting landscape, green one moment, barren the next, breathing in cycles of abundance and silence. Pause for a moment and consider what this means. Our species tends to believe in permanence. Cities feel eternal, mountains feel unchanging, deserts feel everlasting. But the Sahara is proof that landscapes are never fixed. It tells us that what we see is only a snapshot of a much longer story, one chapter in a book that has been written and erased countless times. Imagine, then, what it would feel like to live in such a place, to be born in a land of rivers and forests, and then, within the span of only a few thousand years, to watch it fade into dust. Your children, or your children's children, might be forced to leave behind the pastures of their ancestors and seek refuge by the Nile or along the edge of the Sahel. The Sahara is not just a place. It is a force that has shaped migrations, cultures, and civilizations again and again. Archaeological evidence confirms this rhythm. In the sands of Libya and Algeria, scientists find flint tools scattered beside ancient lake beds. In Niger, they uncover skeletons of fish larger than a human arm. In Chad, they find evidence of vast waters where hippos once wallowed. All of it testifies to a Sahara that was not desert at all, but a flourishing savanna, green and abundant. The cycles themselves are written in the language of Earth's orbit. Just as our planet spins on its axis, it also tilts, wobbles, and shifts its path around the sun. These slow dances, called Milankovitch cycles, govern the rise and fall of rainfall in North Africa. When the tilt of Earth favors strong monsoons, the Sahara blooms. When the tilt changes, the rains withdraw, and the desert returns. It is as if the land itself breathes with cosmic time. But before we wander into the science of those cycles, let's stay for a moment in the strangeness of this contradiction. The world's greatest desert is, in truth, not a desert at all, but a memory of many green lives. It is a land of forgetting and remembering, a place that has shifted from grass to dust and back again so many times that the sands themselves are layered with echoes. Think about the sand slipping between your fingers. Each grain has traveled, been worn down from mountain to pebble to dust. Each grain might have once rested at the bottom of a river or been swept along a floodplain. They are not just sand. They are fragments of an older, wetter world. Perhaps the most humbling thought is this: we live in one of the dry moments. To us it feels eternal. To future generations it may be only a pause between two green ages. What if, in 10,000 years, the Sahara blooms again? What rivers might reappear? What cities might rise along their banks? And what if, hidden beneath the dunes, there are already cities waiting, remnants of the last time this desert was alive, places built when grasslands stretched across the horizon, now entombed in silence, forgotten until the wind or the hand of an archaeologist brushes the sand away. The Sahara reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that landscapes shift in rhythms too slow for a single lifetime, but powerful enough to erase empires and redraw maps. This desert, young though it may be, is one of Earth's great teachers. It tells us that change is not the exception, it is the rule. And so, before we can follow the rivers that once crossed its heart, or the kingdoms that thrived in its green phases, we must first understand the cycles that drive this transformation. The great breath of Earth, tied to the pull of the sun and the tilt of the planet. Because only then can we begin to see the Sahara not as eternal desert, but as something stranger, a place that is always changing, always alive, and perhaps always hiding more than it reveals. The mystery of the Sahara's shifting identity lies not only in the dunes themselves, but in the movements of the entire planet. To understand how a desert can bloom into savanna, We must lift our gaze from the sands and look outward toward the heavens. For the Sahara is shaped not only by wind and heat, but by Earth's slow and silent dance around the sun. Our planet's orbit is not fixed. It wobbles, tilts, and shifts over vast spans of time, as if stirred by invisible hands. These changes are called Milankovitch cycles, after the mathematician who first calculated them. They are not sudden, but gentle and immense, unfolding over tens of thousands of years. A tilt in the axis grows stronger, then weaker. The orbit stretches, then rounds again. The Earth precesses, like a spinning top that sways slowly as it turns. And with each of these shifts, the distribution of sunlight across the planet changes. For North Africa, these cycles mean everything. When the tilt is strong and summer sunlight bears more directly down on the land, the African monsoon strengthens. Warm air rises over the Sahara, drawing moist air inland from the Atlantic. Rain falls, rivers swell, and the desert transforms into grassland. The green Sahara awakens. When the tilt relaxes, or the orbit draws Earth farther from the sun, the rains retreat, the monsoon falters, and the desert reclaims the land. It is a rhythm as old as the planet itself, a cosmic metronome, keeping time not in seconds but in millennia. And the Sahara is its canvas, painted green and gold in alternating strokes. Scientists uncover this rhythm in the smallest of things, in pollen grains, carried on the wind thousands of years ago and now trapped in layers of dust. Each grain, when examined under a microscope, tells of the plants that once grew where now there is only sand. Acacia trees, wild grasses, flowering shrubs, all leaving their delicate fingerprints in the fossil record. In cores drilled from the seabed off West Africa, vast flows of Saharan dust settle layer upon layer. In wet times, the dust diminishes, replaced by grains of pollen. In dry times, the dust thickens, choking the ocean record with the breath of the desert. Ancient lake beds also bear witness. In Chad, in Niger, in Mali, vast depressions, now parched and cracked, once held waters so large they rivaled inland seas. The shorelines are still etched into the landscape, rings of stone and sediment curving across the desert floor. If you could stand there thousands of years ago, the water would stretch to the horizon, alive with fish and crocodiles, edged by reeds whispering in the breeze. Now only the ghost of that shoreline remains, a reminder of cycles too slow for human memory. And then there are the bones, fossilized remains of hippos, giraffes, elephants, and even whales in what is now desert sand. Creatures that could never survive in the Sahara of today. Their presence is proof that this land was once abundant, threaded with rivers and lakes. Each fossil is a message, a fragment of memory from a greener age. Pause for a moment and think of the scale of this. A desert larger than the continental United States, turning to savanna, then back to desert, not once but dozens of times. Entire ecosystems rising and falling with the patience of orbital cycles. It humbles the imagination, and yet the science does not remove the mystery, it deepens it. For what we see is not only the mechanics of orbit and climate, but the consequences for life and culture. When the rains came, humans followed. Communities thrived, cattle were herded, settlements took root. When the rains withdrew, migrations began, pushing people toward the Nile Valley, the Sahel, and beyond. The cycles of Earth became the cycles of civilization. But what if the most recent green age had lasted longer? The last great wet period ended only about 5,000 years ago. If the rains had lingered, if the Sahara had remained fertile, what might have grown there? Would the Sahara, instead of Egypt's Nile, have become the heart of one of the world's great civilizations? Would the desert floor be dotted with ancient cities, their walls rising not from sand but from fields and riversides? Speculation is gentle but tempting. Imagine traders sailing across Lake Megachad, their boats heavy with grain and cattle, linking settlements across a watery plain. Imagine roads carved along riverbanks, connecting cultures from the Atlantic coast deep into the interior. Imagine pyramids not only along the Nile, but scattered across what we now call desert, monuments of stone rising above green valleys. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that civilizations we know nothing about once lived and thrived here. If they did, their remains may be buried deep beneath dunes that shift like oceans of sand concealing their memory. Archaeologists believe that countless sites remain undiscovered, hidden under hundreds of meters of drifting dust. The Sahara may yet prove to be one of the richest archaeological landscapes on Earth, not barren but brimming with forgotten cities. And if the cycle turns again, orbital mechanics suggest that another humid period will come, perhaps in 10 to 15,000 years. If humanity still walks the earth, our descendants may see rivers return to the Sahara. They may sail its lakes, plant its soils, build their cities where we see only wasteland. To them, the Sahara of our age will seem as strange as the green Sahara seems to us. The science of Milankovitch cycles shows us that deserts are not eternal. They are phases, shaped by the geometry of earth and sun. What we see now is only one state among many. The Sahara is not fixed, it is a pendulum, swinging between extremes of life and silence. And that raises a haunting thought. If the Sahara can hide its green past so completely, what else does the earth conceal? What other landscapes have shifted so dramatically that their histories lie buried, unrecognized? Perhaps Doggerland beneath the North Sea, once a land of rivers and forests. Perhaps Sunderland in Southeast Asia, drowned by rising seas. The Sahara is not alone in its cycles. It is one of many lost worlds, waiting to be remembered. For now the desert stretches vast and dry, but beneath its silence the records remain. Pollen, lakes, fossils, shorelines, all whispering the same truth, that what we see is not all there is. The Sahara is not a desert. It is a memory in motion, a land that breathes in thousand-year cycles. And as we move deeper into this story, we begin to glimpse not only rivers hidden beneath sand, but empires that once flourished where now there is nothing. For the science of cycles is only the beginning. The next step takes us into the hidden waterways of the Sahara itself. Beneath the Sahara's shifting dunes lies a secret geography. What looks to us like an endless desert is, in truth, a vast palimpsest of forgotten rivers, their courses carved long ago and then buried by time. For centuries, travelers crossing the Sahara spoke of mirages, shimmering lakes that vanished as one approached, yet satellites orbiting far above have revealed that the mirages were not entirely false. Hidden below the surface are the ghostly pathways of rivers that once flowed wide and strong, shaping valleys, nourishing forests, and carrying life deep into the heart of Africa. Modern radar and imaging technologies have pulled back the veil. Where the human eye sees only sand, instruments detect subtle variations, lines, channels, curves etched into the desert floor. These are the relics of rivers, some of them enormous, rivaling even the great waterways of today. The most spectacular of these is the Tamanrasset River. Once it flowed for thousands of kilometers across what is now one of the driest regions on Earth. Its catchment basin stretched across much of the western Sahara, collecting rainfall from the Atlas Mountains in the north and carrying it southward through Algeria, Mali, and Mauritania. In its prime, It may have rivaled the Nile in scale, pouring into the Atlantic through a massive delta off the coast of Mauritania. Imagine standing on its banks during the last green age. The river, swollen by monsoon rains, carrying waters through valleys where today only caravans wander. Along its edges, reeds would sway, crocodiles would bask, fish would leap from its currents. Villages may have clustered on its shores, their people fishing, farming, and trading. The Tamanrasset was not simply a river, it was a lifeline, a green corridor slicing through the desert. And it was not alone. Across the Sahara, radar has revealed entire networks of fossilized rivers, some connecting inland seas to the coasts, others branching like veins across regions now barren. In Sudan and Libya, dry channels called wadis, once seasonal rivers, wind across the desert floor. In Chad, channels link to what was once Lake Megachad, a body of water so vast it stretched for hundreds of kilometers, larger than all of modern Europe's lakes combined. Together, these rivers formed a hidden network that bound the Sahara to the wider world. They were not isolated, but conduits, carrying not only water, but animals, people, and ideas. The Sahara, during its green phases, was less a barrier than a bridge, a place of passage linking the Mediterranean to the Sahel and beyond. Today, these channels lie dry, but their traces remain carved into bedrock and hidden beneath dunes. Scientists study them not only to reconstruct the past, but to imagine futures. If the rains return, if the cycles shift again, these rivers could flow once more, reawakening valleys that have lain silent for millennia. Consider for a moment the Tamanrasset Delta, now submerged beneath the Atlantic. Sediment cores pulled from the seabed reveal layers of fine silt, carried there by ancient floods. They tell of a river that once poured into the ocean, forming an ecosystem rich with life. Fish, birds, and perhaps even human communities thrived along this coastal plain, now lost beneath waves. It is humbling to realize that much of what we know about these vanished rivers comes not from walking the desert itself, but from listening to the ocean where their stories ended. But what would it have been like to follow these rivers inland? Picture yourself traveling upstream along the Tamanrasset thousands of years ago. The land would unfold in shades of green and gold, herds of gazelle drinking at the water's edge, hippos grunting in the shallows, families moving cattle from pasture to pasture, canoes hewn from wood gliding across the water, laden with grain or clay pots. The Sahara you see today is silence. The Sahara of then would have been song, and perhaps there were cities. Archaeologists suspect that where rivers meet seas, human settlements flourish. If the Tamanrasset carried waters as mighty as the Nile, could there have been towns or trading posts along its banks? Places where goods from inland Africa were exchanged with those arriving from the Mediterranean or even beyond. The sands may still hide such stories, their walls collapsed, their stones scattered, waiting for discovery. Even the smaller channels hold intrigue. Many waters converge into larger basins, suggesting that entire regions of the Sahara were once interconnected by waterways. Think of them not as separate rivers, but as a circulatory system, nourishing a body of land that today appears lifeless. Each channel carried nutrients, sediments, and seeds, spreading life far from the coasts. The presence of such rivers challenges how we imagine human history. We often think of the Nile as the singular artery of North Africa, the only place capable of sustaining great civilizations. But what if the Sahara itself once contained multiple Niles, each supporting communities, cultures, and perhaps even kingdoms of their own? If so, their disappearance into sand would not mean they never existed. it would mean their memory has simply been buried. The story of the Sahara's hidden rivers is not only one of the past, but also of the future. Deep beneath the desert, vast aquifers store the fossil water left behind by these vanished systems. Libya's great man-made river project has tapped into some of these reserves, piping water hundreds of kilometers to coastal cities. In a sense, the ancient rivers still flow, not on the surface but underground, their legacy sustaining modern life. And yet, there is fragility here. These aquifers are not easily replenished. They are remnants of wetter times, finite gifts from vanished climates. Once exhausted, they will not return until the Sahara itself blooms again. Speculation opens the door to wonder. If the most recent green Sahara had endured longer, if the rivers had continued flowing, how different might Africa's story be? Would empires have flourished across the desert itself rather than along its margins? Would the great centers of civilization have been not along the Nile or the Mediterranean, but deep within the Sahara, along the banks of rivers now invisible to us? Imagine looking at a map of the world where the Sahara is not an empty expanse, but a patchwork of fertile valleys and interconnected trade routes. Caravans might have followed river roads instead of desert tracks. Fleets might have sailed inland seas. The desert we know as a barrier may have been, in another timeline, one of Earth's greatest crossroads. And what of the present? Even now, as satellites continue to map the subsurface of the Sahara, more rivers are being discovered. The hidden waterways number not in tens, but in hundreds. Each one is a reminder that landscapes are not what they appear to be. Beneath silence there is memory. Beneath sand there is water. Beneath desert there is life. As we continue this journey, the rivers lead us naturally toward the vast lakes that once gathered their waters, the inland seas of the Sahara, now reduced to dust and echoes. To understand those, we must leave the channels and follow the basins where entire ecosystems once thrived. Follow the ghost rivers of the Sahara far enough, and they lead you into basins so vast they defy the imagination. Today, these depressions appear as cracked clay, scattered dunes, or faint arcs traced into the land. But not so long ago, in geological terms, they held water on a scale that rivaled inland seas. To stand in the Sahara of 10,000 years ago was to stand beside some of the largest lakes Earth has ever known. The greatest of these was Lake Megachad. At its peak, it was larger than all of today's Great Lakes of North America combined. Imagine a body of water stretching over 360,000 square kilometers, swallowing up much of what is now Chad, Niger, Nigeria, and Cameroon. To grasp its scale, picture the map of Europe, then imagine much of it covered in a single lake. Boats could have sailed for days without ever seeing the far shore. And Megachad was not alone. Across the Sahara, evidence of megalakes emerges again and again. Lake Fezzan in Libya, Lake Anet in Algeria. Countless smaller basins filled and emptied with each humid cycle. Together they formed a chain of freshwater seas that turned the Sahara into a patchwork of green corridors and blue expanses. The fossil record tells us what these waters once held. Embedded in the sands are the bones of fish, some small, some large enough to feed a family. Fossilized crocodiles lie where dunes now rise, their long jaws and armored scales preserved as if still waiting in ambush. Hippopotamus bones are scattered across dry valleys, reminders of herds that once wallowed in the shallows. Even elephants roamed the shores, their tusks worn smooth from grazing on grasses nourished by lake-fed soils. Pause for a moment and try to see it, the Sahara not as a desert, but as a land of lakes and rivers. fishermen casting nets from dugout canoes, hippos snorting in the reeds, migratory birds tracing arcs across the sky, resting on islands that dotted these waters. Where today caravans struggle to cross sand seas, traders may once have paddled with ease, carried by currents, guided by stars reflected on the surface of inland seas. Archaeological sites support this vision. Along the ancient shorelines of Lake Megachad, stone tools have been found, evidence of human presence at the water's edge. Pottery shards suggest communities gathered there, cooking fish, storing grain, and shaping daily life around the rhythm of the lake. Some researchers even speculate that early experiments in agriculture in this region may have been linked to these fertile lake shores, where silt-rich soils made planting possible. But it is the scale of these lakes that continues to astonish. From satellite images, the outlines of ancient shorelines appear like scars across the desert floor, visible only from above. The Megachad Basin alone could have supported vast networks of communities, each connected by water. In a world without highways, these lakes would have been the highways, broad blue roads stretching across Africa. Speculation takes us further. What if these mega lakes became hubs of trade? Imagine a canoe laden with obsidian, salt, or cattle hides, gliding from one village to another across Megachad. Imagine goods flowing not along desert tracks, but across watery highways, linking communities hundreds of kilometers apart. Perhaps knowledge itself, ideas of farming, herding, or tool-making, spread across these blue corridors, just as surely as pots and stones did. And then, as the cycles turned, the waters receded. Megachad shrank to a fraction of its size, leaving behind Lake Chad as a mere remnant, less than a tenth of what it once was. What had been an inland sea became scattered pools, marshes, and eventually sand. The shorelines still remain, etched into rock, whispering of the times when this was all water. For people living through that transformation, the change must have been overwhelming. Imagine being born on the shores of an endless lake, only to grow old, watching it pull back year after year. Villages once on the water's edge would be stranded far inland. Fishing grounds would vanish, herds would die or be driven away. Families might abandon their homes, following the retreating waters until they disappeared altogether. The shrinking of the lakes was not just an environmental shift, it was a reshaping of human destiny. And yet, even in their decline, these lakes left gifts. As the waters withdrew, they deposited fertile soils, creating strips of arable land where farming could take root. Some scholars believe this process may have driven migrations eastward toward the Nile Valley, carrying with them agricultural practices that would one day feed the rise of Egyptian civilization. In this way, the lakes of the Sahara may have influenced history far beyond their shores. There is something almost haunting about these vanished seas. They remind us that landscapes we think permanent are anything but, that beneath the silence of the Sahara lies the memory of waters so vast they could drown entire nations on today's map. They remind us too that climate does not move in one direction, but in cycles, expansion, contraction, bloom, collapse. And perhaps in some distant future the Sahara's lakes may return, if orbital cycles bring the rains back, if monsoons strengthen again, the basins are still there, waiting. The depressions that once held Megachad have not disappeared, they are only empty. With enough water, they could fill again, restoring seas to the heart of Africa. Speculation allows us to imagine what would it mean for modern civilization if such lakes returned. Could they once again become arteries of trade, this time with ships carrying not stone tools, but solar-powered cargo? Could the Sahara, instead of being seen as a barrier, become a fertile inland sea feeding millions? Perhaps one day maps of Africa will show not a vast desert, but great blue expanses where sand once stretched unbroken. But for now the Sahara's lakes remain silent. Fossils of fish lie far from water. Crocodiles are preserved in sand where they once swam. Hippos, elephants, and humans left their traces in shorelines that no longer see waves. It is a reminder that what seems eternal is often only temporary, and that the Sahara, we know, is only one version of a land that has worn many faces. And so the rivers and lakes of the Sahara carry us forward in this journey, not only into the memory of landscapes, but into the memory of people. For where there was water, there were humans. Where there were savannas, there was life. And on the rocks of the Sahara, in faded carvings and painted figures, we find the stories of the first people who walked across its green age. When the rains returned and the rivers filled their beds, humans were not far behind. The Green Sahara was not just an ecological miracle, it was also a stage upon which some of the earliest chapters of human culture were written. Unlike fossils of hippos or bones of fish, the traces these people left behind were not merely natural, they were intentional. They were messages, carved and painted onto stone, still visible thousands of years later. Across the Sahara, from Algeria to Niger, from Libya to Chad, scattered on cliffsides and hidden in canyons, lie the galleries of a forgotten world. Rock art, tens of thousands of images, etches into stone a record of life in a land now unrecognizable. Hunters with bows and arrows, herds of cattle, their horns sweeping gracefully upward, giraffes with elongated necks, elephants with great curved tusks, crocodiles stretching toward the water. Imagine yourself walking into a canyon, the air dry, the silence deep. You press your hand to the cool rock, and there, before your eyes, a figure emerges, a man drawn in ochre, holding a spear. Behind him, cattle are carefully depicted, each horn precise, each posture alive. These are not idle doodles. They are memory. They are story. They are proof that communities thrived here, in a land where today no such life can survive. Some panels show herders guiding cattle across open plains. Others depict hunting scenes, with bows drawn taut, arrows aimed at antelopes mid-leap. There are even more enigmatic images, dances in flowing lines, masked figures, shapes that may represent ritual or myth. These people were not only surviving, they were building culture, developing ways of seeing and explaining their world. The art tells us something profound. This was not a marginal desert edge where humans eked out survival. This was a heartland, a place where life was abundant enough that people could invest time in creativity, ceremony, and expression. Archaeologists studying these sites have traced distinct phases of artistic style. Early works focus on wild animals, giraffes, elephants, crocodiles, suggesting a hunter-gatherer culture deeply enmeshed with the natural savanna. Later, cattle begin to dominate the images, reflecting a shift toward herding and domestication. This evolution on stone mirrors the evolution of society itself, from mobile hunters to settled communities. At sites such as Tassili N'Ajjer in Algeria, the scale of the art is overwhelming. Thousands of figures cover the sandstone, stretching across cliffs for miles. UNESCO has called it the greatest prehistoric open-air museum in the world. Standing there, one feels not only the presence of ancient people, but the weight of time itself, preserved in paint and incision. And yet these paintings are not just history, they are intimate. Look closely and you notice small details, the way a calf nuzzles its mother, the tilt of a hunter's head, the curve of a dancer's hand. These are moments of daily life frozen in time, telling us that the Sahara was once a place where families lived, where laughter and ritual and work wove together in the rhythm of ordinary human existence. But what did these communities look like beyond their art? Archaeological digs reveal hearths where meals were cooked, stone tools sharpened by repeated use, pottery shards decorated with patterns. The remains of huts suggest settlements, not sprawling cities, but villages where people lived together, sharing food and labor. The presence of grinding stones indicates that grains were being processed, hinting at early forms of cultivation alongside herding. The Green Sahara was rich. Its savannas supported not only wildlife but also human life. Early settlers adapted quickly, learning to track seasonal rains, to move with herds, to exploit rivers and lakes. They fished, they hunted, they herded, they painted. Their lives were not static but dynamic, shaped by cycles of abundance and scarcity, by the opportunities and challenges of a shifting land. Speculation allows us to take their fragments and imagine the whole. Perhaps the rock art was more than memory, it was communication. Warnings of hunting grounds, maps of migration routes, symbols of shared identity. Perhaps rituals were held before the painted figures, dances performed by firelight, chants echoing against stone walls. What stories were told in those canyons? What myths whispered into the night? We can never fully know. But the art tells us that story itself was alive, that imagination was as much a part of their survival as stone tools and fire. Consider also the scale of community. For such vast art to be produced, there must have been gatherings, groups working together, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The Green Sahara was not an isolated wilderness, but a network of people bound by shared landscapes and shared traditions. And then there is the question of legacy. When the rains withdrew, when the lakes dried, many of these communities likely migrated eastward toward the Nile Valley. Did they carry with them the memory of herding, the skills of farming, the traditions of ritual and art? Did the cultures of the Green Sahara seed the rise of Egyptian civilization, their cattle and their gods transformed into new forms along the Nile? Archaeologists debate this, but the possibility is tantalizing, that the rock art of the Sahara is not only a record of a lost world, but a foundation stone for the world that came after. The first people of the Green Sahara remind us of something essential. Humans are not passive inhabitants of their environment. We adapt, we shape, we imagine. When the desert was green, people built lives that were full, creative, and meaningful. Their art is their voice across time, whispering to us from stone. We were here, we lived, we thrived. And though the sands have reclaimed their villages, though the lakes have vanished and the rivers turned to dust, those voices remain. Carved into rock, painted in ochre, they endure, reminding us that beneath the desert lies not emptiness, but memory. As the Green Sahara flourished, its first people were not only hunters and gatherers. Over time, they became herders, reshaping their relationship with animals and with the land itself. This transition from following wild herds to guiding domesticated ones was one of the most profound changes in human history. It marked the beginning of a new way of life, one that transformed the Sahara into a cradle of pastoralism and perhaps into one of humanity's earliest large-scale agricultural frontiers. The evidence is scattered but compelling. Archaeologists working in the Sahara have uncovered bones of cattle carefully arranged in ancient burials, suggesting reverence for these animals beyond mere consumption. Rock art across Algeria, Niger, and Libya shows not only wild fauna, but domesticated herds, cattle with collars, guided by human figures clustered together as if penned or led. These images, dated thousands of years before Egypt's pyramids, tell us that herding was central to Saharan life. Genetic studies add another layer to the story. By analyzing the DNA of modern cattle and comparing it with ancient remains, scientists have traced lineages that suggest domesticated cattle spread through the Sahara early, perhaps as far back as 8,000 years ago. Some herds may have originated in the Near East, brought by migrating peoples, but others appear to have been independently domesticated in Africa itself. The Sahara, with its vast grasslands and plentiful water during green periods, was an ideal laboratory for this experiment in domestication. Imagine the moment when wild cattle, once hunted with arrows and spears, began to follow humans willingly. At first, perhaps, young calves were captured and raised. Over generations, animals became tamer, less prone to flee, more accustomed to human presence. Gradually, herds formed, sustainable, controllable, providing not only meat, but milk, hides, and even symbolic wealth. For Saharan communities, cattle were more than animals. They were livelihood, security, and identity. The transition to herding also reshaped the rhythms of human life. Hunters had once moved with the seasons, following game across vast ranges. Herders, by contrast, developed patterns of migration tied to grazing lands and water sources. This semi-nomadic pastoralism created new social structures, larger communities, cooperation in protecting herds, shared rituals around cattle. Rock art shows scenes of cattle parades, ceremonies that may have honored these animals not just as resources, but as sacred companions. Some researchers believe cattle cults emerged in the Sahara long before similar traditions along the Nile. The reverence for bulls and cows, seen in Egyptian religion, may trace its roots back to Saharan herding societies. If so, the domestication of cattle here did not merely change diets. It changed cosmologies. It gave birth to new ways of imagining humanity's place in the world. Archaeological sites provide glimpses of these societies. Grinding stones suggest that alongside herding, people processed grains, perhaps cultivating small plots near lakes and rivers. Pottery shards bear residue of dairy fats, evidence that milk was consumed and possibly transformed into butter or cheese. These are the fingerprints of innovation, of communities not merely surviving but experimenting, adapting, and thriving. Speculation allows us to ask, what if the Sahara was not only a pastoral heartland, but one of the first large-scale agricultural regions on Earth? With rivers, lakes, and fertile soils, with herds providing manure and milk, the Sahara could have supported farming long before more famous river valleys rose to prominence. Could it be that the world's agricultural revolutions were not confined to Mesopotamia or the Nile, but also unfolded here, in a land we now call desert? If this were true, the implications are vast. It would mean that the Sahara was not a marginal landscape, but a core region of human development. It would mean that lost civilizations may have once relied on these cattle and crops, their traces now buried beneath dunes. It would mean that Egypt's eventual rise might have been seeded by traditions carried from herders who abandoned a drying Sahara, bringing with them cattle, agriculture, and ritual, memory. Consider the resilience this required. As the climate shifted, as lakes shrank and grasslands contracted, herders adapted. They moved their cattle to new pastures, sought out hidden wells, tapped underground water. They became masters of mobility, reading the land with precision, learning to live within its cycles. Their legacy survives even today among Tuareg and Fulani pastoralists, who trace cultural echoes of ancient Saharan herders. The Green Sahara was in many ways a laboratory of human adaptation. It taught our ancestors to think not only of the hunt, but of stewardship, to measure wealth not in immediate gain, but in the continuity of herds, to plan for seasons, to share labor, to build social bonds around animals and land. These are the foundations of agriculture, of civilization itself. And so we must ask, how many stories remain untold beneath the sand? If the Sahara was once a center of herding and perhaps early farming, then what remains hidden? Entire villages may lie preserved, their cattle pens intact, their pottery buried, their bones whispering of diets shaped by both milk and grain. Whole lifeways may be entombed beneath dunes, waiting for archaeologists armed with radar and patience to bring them back into view. Speculation stretches further still. If the last Green Sahara had endured, if rivers had not dried and lakes had not vanished, might this region have birthed empires equal to Mesopotamia or the Indus Valley? Might cities have risen around Lake Megachad, capitals with temples dedicated to cattle gods, markets bustling with trade in milk, grain, and fish? Might the Sahara, rather than the Nile, have become the axis of African civilization? The thought lingers that our understanding of prehistory is incomplete, skewed by the accident of survival. Stone endures, so we remember rock art. Bones fossilize, so we know of hippos and giraffes, but mud huts collapse, wood rots, cloth decays, and shifting dunes bury everything. What we see of the Green Sahara is only a fraction of what once was. The true scale of herding societies, their richness, their complexity, may lie hidden forever. Yet the fragments we do possess are enough to glimpse their brilliance. They tell us that the Sahara was not empty. It was alive with people who domesticated cattle, who experimented with cultivation, who created art and ritual. They remind us that civilization does not begin suddenly in one place, but emerges in many, across different landscapes, shaped by opportunity and necessity. The first people of the Green Sahara gave the world more than art. They gave it one of humanity's earliest lessons in partnership with animals, in tending the land, in creating abundance from scarcity. Their story is one of transformation, from hunters chasing game to herders guiding cattle, from survival to culture, from moment to memory. Long after the lakes receded and the savannas withdrew, long after the Sahara began to harden into the desert, we recognize today there emerged a people who did not retreat. Where most communities followed the rivers east or south, abandoning the drying interior, the Garamantes chose another path. They stayed. They built an empire not in spite of the desert, but because of it, mastering techniques so ingenious that for centuries their existence seemed closer to myth than history. The Garamantes lived in what is now southwestern Libya, deep in the Fezzan region. To the Romans and Greeks who wrote about them, they were both feared and admired, a people who seemed to rise from the dunes like a mirage, raiding caravans, trading goods, and commanding territory where survival should have been impossible. For a long time, scholars dismissed them as exaggerations, desert phantoms conjured by travelers' tales. But archaeology has proven the stories true. Beneath the sands, the ruins of their cities remain, testifying to a kingdom that flourished in the heart of the Sahara nearly 2,000 years ago. At the center of their success was water. In a desert where rainfall was scarce, the Garamans engineered an underground irrigation system so advanced it astonished modern archaeologists. These channels, called fogaras, tapped into fossil water stored in deep aquifers. Dug by hand, stretching for kilometers beneath the surface, they carried cool water from underground springs to the surface, feeding fields and orchards. Imagine a labyrinth of stone-lined tunnels, sloping gently downward, invisible from above, yet providing the lifeblood of entire communities. With this water, the Garamantes cultivated crops, wheat, barley, dates, and grapes, right in the middle of the desert, their fields spread in green oases, their orchards heavy with fruit. What to an outsider appeared as endless wasteland was for them fertile ground, transformed by ingenuity and persistence. Their capital city, Garama, was a thriving hub of life. Archaeological excavations reveal walled towns, houses built of stone, cemeteries filled with elaborate burials. The Garamantes were not nomads clinging to survival. They were urban people, organized, wealthy, and ambitious. Roman records describe them as formidable opponents, mounted on fast chariots, raiding across the desert with skill and speed. They controlled trade routes that connected sub-Saharan Africa to the Mediterranean, moving gold, ivory, salt, and even enslaved people across the desert. Pause for a moment and picture it. Caravans laden with goods arriving at Garama, greeted by bustling markets, farmers tending green fields on the edges of dunes, children playing in shaded courtyards, their lives sustained by water that flowed unseen beneath their feet. The Garamantes had built not just settlements, but an empire of sand and ingenuity. Speculation lingers around their origins. Were they descendants of the Green Sahara's pastoralists, the herders who once painted cattle on stone walls? Did they inherit traditions of water management, adapting them into the underground fogaras? Or were they something entirely new, a people who learned to transform scarcity into abundance in ways no one else had attempted? Whatever their roots, their rise is a testament to human resilience. Their story also raises a question about how we imagine deserts. To most outsiders, the Sahara was an obstacle, a sea of sand to be crossed with fear and hardship. To the Garamantes, it was a homeland, a source of identity and power. They did not see emptiness, they saw opportunity, hidden aquifers waiting to be tapped, oases waiting to be cultivated, trade routes waiting to be controlled. And yet, their empire was fragile. The fogaras depended on fossil water that could not be replenished quickly. Over centuries, as the aquifers drained and maintenance of the tunnels became more difficult, the system began to falter. Fields dried, orchards withered, and the kingdom weakened. By the fall of the Roman Empire, the Garamantes themselves had declined, their cities gradually abandoned, their ingenuity swallowed by the desert. But their legacy endures. Satellite images have traced hundreds of fogaras stretching across Libya, some extending for dozens of kilometers. The remains of Garama and other towns still lie beneath the sand, waiting to be fully uncovered. Their survival in such an inhospitable place offers a lesson that resonates today, that even in the harshest landscapes, human creativity can carve out abundance. Speculation beckons us further. What if the Garamantes had endured longer? Could their empire have rivaled Rome, not by sea and forest, but by desert and oasis? Could the Sahara have become not a barrier between North Africa and the Sahel, but the foundation of a continental network of cities linked by hidden rivers of stone beneath the dunes? It is tempting to imagine a map where Garama stands beside Athens and Carthage as a great capital, its wealth drawn not from conquest of fertile valleys, but from mastery of the desert itself. Perhaps in another timeline, the Sahara's heart would be remembered not for emptiness but for empire. The Garamantes remind us that the desert has never been silent, that beneath the sand lie stories of resilience and ambition, that water, invisible and hidden, can sustain not just life but civilization, and that sometimes the most unlikely places are the ones where ingenuity burns brightest. When archaeologists first began to survey the Fezzan region in the 20th century, they expected to find traces of nomadic camps, scattered stone tools, perhaps the faintest outline of oasis settlements. What they discovered instead was something astonishing. The ruins of entire towns lying beneath the sand, their walls, streets, and cemeteries preserved in silence. The Garamantes, once dismissed as desert raiders, revealed themselves as urban builders, rulers of a complex society whose memory had been almost erased. At sites like Jerma, the former capital, stone walls still rise from the earth. Excavations uncovered houses clustered along streets, fortified compounds, and sprawling cemeteries where the dead were buried with care. Pottery, beads, and imported goods tell us these people were not isolated. They were connected, woven into the fabric of Mediterranean trade. Roman amphorae have been found here, fragments of vessels that once carried olive oil and wine across the sea. Carthaginian artifacts too appear in the sands, proof that the Garamantes were linked to great powers far beyond the desert. Imagine a caravan arriving at Garama 2,000 years ago. Traders from Carthage, their camels laden with amphorae of oil, bolts of cloth, and crafted metal. In exchange, the Garamantes offered gold, salt, ivory, and perhaps enslaved captives, taken during raids farther south. In the marketplace, voices mingled, Berber, Punic, Latin, echoing off the stone walls of desert towns. What appears to us now as barren isolation was then a crossroads of commerce, a junction between the Mediterranean and the sub-Saharan world. And it was not just one city. Surveys have revealed dozens of Garamantean towns, each surrounded by fields irrigated by fogaras, each sustained by the ingenuity of underground water. Walled compounds suggest social stratification, perhaps noble families or ruling clans who oversaw the flow of trade. Cemeteries reveal not only burial goods, but also diversity in grave styles, hinting at cultural blending and evolving traditions. The Garamantes were not static, they were dynamic, adapting, expanding, and interacting with the wider world. What lingers most powerfully is the sense of scale. If so many towns have already been uncovered, how many more remain hidden beneath dunes? The Sahara covers over 9 million square kilometers. Archaeologists have explored only a fraction. Satellite imaging has begun to reveal anomalies, lines, shadows, and disturbances in the sand that may mark the remains of walls or roads. The desert, in its silence, may be holding entire cities in its grip, preserving them until we are ready to find them. Speculation stirs the imagination. Could there be Garamantean metropolises still entombed, their streets intact, their cemeteries untouched, their artifacts waiting to be rediscovered? Could we, with LIDAR and radar, one day peel back the dunes and find not fragments, but whole urban landscapes as dramatic as Pompeii or Machu Picchu? The Sahara may hold not just scattered ruins, but an archive of forgotten civilizations. Consider the trade networks that would have connected such cities. The Garamantes were not an isolated tribe. They were part of a vast web that reached Rome, Carthage, and beyond. Roman writers described their swift chariots and their desert raids, but also acknowledged them as allies and trading partners. Carthage, too, depended on Saharan trade, bringing salt, gold, and slaves northward. The Garamantes were intermediaries, controllers of desert highways, mediators between worlds. Their decline came quietly. As the Foggorers failed, as aquifers dried, as external powers shifted, the Garamantian cities began to wither. By the end of the first millennium CE, their towns were abandoned, their walls collapsing under drifting sand. What remained was silence. For centuries, the Garamantes were remembered only as rumor, their empire forgotten, and yet the sands preserved them. Today, archaeologists walk through the same streets, trace the same walls, hold in their hands the same pottery once carried across the desert. The dunes are not just destroyers, they are also guardians. In covering the Garamantes, they kept them safe from the erosion of time, holding them in secret until satellites and spades uncovered them again. Speculation offers one final, haunting possibility, that what we have found so far is only a fragment, that beneath the Sahara, countless other cities lie hidden, cities from the Garamantes, from earlier Green Ages, from cultures we do not yet even imagine. The desert may be the largest archive of forgotten worlds on the planet, its library written in stone and sand. When you look at the Sahara today, it is easy to see emptiness, but if you could see with the eyes of time, the dunes would dissolve, and in their place would rise walls, markets, fields, and cemeteries. You would see caravans crossing between towns, trade flowing north and south, life thriving in the very heart of the desert, and perhaps you would realize that the Sahara has always been more than it appears. Beyond the ruins of lost cities, the Sahara holds another enigma, not the work of human hands, but something far stranger. Scattered across the eastern desert of Libya and Egypt are fields of glass, pure greenish-yellow fragments, some as clear as crystal, others opaque and bubbled, twisted into strange shapes. To stumble across them is to feel as if the desert itself has shattered, leaving behind shards of another world. This is Libyan desert glass, one of the rarest natural materials on Earth. Unlike volcanic glass, which forms from lava, or man-made glass shaped in furnaces, these pieces are the product of unimaginable heat. Heat so intense it melted desert sand into liquid, then cooled into glassy sheets and chunks. Some fragments are small enough to fit in a pocket, while others weigh more than 20 kilograms. They gleam like frozen lightning, scattered across the dunes. For millennia, people have been drawn to them. Ancient Egyptians prized the glass, carving it into jewelry and sacred objects. Perhaps the most famous piece is a scarab-shaped gem set into the golden necklace of Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh. That jewel, carved from Libyan desert glass, traveled from the emptiest corner of the Sahara into the heart of royal treasure. Its presence in the tomb suggests the Egyptians saw it as something more than mere stone, something touched by fire, worthy of kings. But what created it? To melt sand into glass requires temperatures above 1,600 degrees Celsius, hotter than any natural fire on Earth. Theories abound. Some suggest a meteorite impact, the sudden collision of a cosmic rock with the desert floor, unleashing an explosion of heat and pressure. Others propose an airburst, when a meteor explodes in the atmosphere, its shockwave fusing the sand below. Still others wonder if volcanic eruptions might be responsible, though no nearby volcanoes match the scale required. Whatever the cause, the desert glass is a testament to forces far beyond human scale. Imagine standing in the Sahara as a blinding light erupts overhead, the sky torn open by fire. In seconds, dunes melt, Sand flows like lava, the air itself shimmering with heat. Then silence, the fire passes, leaving behind a desert transformed, fields of glass glittering under the sun. The glass itself preserves evidence of its violent birth. Some pieces are riddled with bubbles, trapped gas from molten sand cooling too quickly. Others contain minerals that only form under extreme pressure, the kind found in meteor impacts. Tiny grains of cosmic material, fragments of the impacting body, are embedded in the glass, microscopic fingerprints of an extraterrestrial visitor, and yet there's still no consensus. No obvious crater has been found near the fields of Libyan desert glass, puzzling scientists who expect an impact scar. If it was an airburst, it must have been larger than the Tunguska event in Siberia, which flattened forests across 2,000 square kilometers in 1908. The Sahara, vast and silent, may have absorbed such an explosion without leaving obvious scars. But the glass remains, an enduring reminder that the desert has been shaped not only by water and wind, but by fire from the sky. Speculation opens wide here. Could ancient peoples who found these glittering stones have woven them into myths of gods or celestial battles? Did they see the desert glass as the remnants of divine fire, fragments of the sun fallen to earth? Tutankhamun's necklace suggests reverence, an object so rare and luminous that it was reserved for royalty, placed among treasures meant to guide a king into eternity. What if such events were remembered in oral traditions, carried forward as myths of fire gods, of burning skies, of deserts born from catastrophe? The Sahara is filled with legends, stories of vanished lands and divine punishments. Could some of them be memories, distorted but enduring, of the day when the sky itself set the desert ablaze? Libyan desert glass is not unique in the world, but its fields are unmatched in size and purity. Other impact glasses exist in Argentina, in the United States, in Central Asia, but nowhere else is the material so abundant or so pristine. To walk across those Libyan dunes is to tread upon the frozen remnants of a cataclysm, a silent archive of cosmic violence. And yet, the mystery deepens. If a meteor created the glass, what size was it? Where did it strike? If it was an airburst, how powerful was the explosion, and how often do such events occur? Could another happen in our time, turning sand to glass again, reshaping landscapes in seconds? The desert holds its answers close, scattering them in shimmering fragments, but refusing to reveal the whole story. Speculation invites an even larger question. Did cosmic fire hasten the Sahara's desertification? Could the heat of such an event have altered regional climate, searing soil, disrupting ecosystems, tipping the balance toward dryness? It is impossible to say, but the thought lingers. The Sahara is shaped by cycles of rain and drought, yes, but perhaps also at times by fire from the heavens. The fields of Libyan desert glass are reminders that deserts are not only barren, they are archives of extremes. Water once flowed here, feeding rivers and lakes. People once thrived here, building cities and empires, and fire once fell here, melting the very sand beneath their feet. Each layer tells a different story, each one waiting to be pieced together into the larger narrative of the Sahara's forgotten worlds. What force could transform sand into glass? What kind of fire could reach across kilometers of desert and leave behind fields of molten memory? For more than a century, scientists have debated the origin of Libyan desert glass, and with it the story of one of the Sahara's greatest mysteries. Three primary theories contend for explanation: a meteor impact, a cosmic airburst, or a volcanic origin. Each has its champions, each carries evidence, and each invites speculation. The simplest idea is that a meteorite struck the Sahara, releasing energy equal to 1,000 nuclear bombs, instantly vaporizing sand and fusing it into glass. Impact craters elsewhere on Earth show that such events are not rare in geological time. The presence of shocked quartz and high-pressure minerals in some desert glass samples supports this hypothesis. Yet no obvious crater has been found near the Libyan fields. If an impact created the glass, where is the scar? Did shifting sands bury it, or did erosion erase it over tens of thousands of years? The second theory, now favored by many, is the airburst. In this scenario, a large meteor entered Earth's atmosphere but exploded before hitting the ground. The blast wave, hotter than the surface of the sun, could have fused sand into glass without leaving a crater. The 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia, which flattened forests across 2,000 square kilometers, offers a modern analog. Yet Tunguska left no glass. If an airburst formed Libyan desert glass, it must have been even hotter, even more destructive. Could the Sahara have endured such an inferno, its dunes momentarily transformed into rivers of molten glass? The third possibility, volcanic origin, remains the weakest. No volcanic deposits of the right age or composition exist near the Libyan desert glass fields. And while volcanoes can produce obsidian, they cannot replicate the purity and scale of these Saharan fields. Most geologists now dismiss this idea, though the possibility lingers as a reminder that the Earth itself is capable of violence as extraordinary as anything from the heavens. Yet perhaps the truth lies not in choosing one theory, but in recognizing the uncertainty. The Sahara has not given up its secrets easily. Its shifting sands conceal evidence. Its silence confounds certainty. What remains undeniable is the glass itself, thousands of tons of it, scattered across the desert like the shards of a shattered star. But science is only one layer of this mystery. Human imagination adds another. For ancient peoples who stumbled across fields of gleaming glass, explanations must have taken the form of myth. To them, the stones could only have been gifts or warnings from the gods, fire from the sky, lightning captured in stone, fragments of the sun fallen to earth. Egyptian priests who placed a desert glass scarab in Tutankhamun's necklace may have seen it as more than a gem. Perhaps it was a talisman of cosmic fire, a symbol of divine power, a relic of a moment when the heavens touched the earth. Oral traditions across North Africa include tales of fire gods, of deserts born in flame, of lands destroyed by heavenly punishment. Could these be echoes, however distorted, of a real cosmic catastrophe witnessed by ancient eyes? Speculation deepens the mystery. What if the glass was not only a byproduct of cosmic fire, but a turning point in the Sahara's history? Could the blast have altered local ecosystems, searing soil, igniting vegetation, killing wildlife across vast regions? Could such an event have weakened the balance of climate at a critical moment, accelerating the shift from green savanna to dry desert? The Sahara's desertification is primarily explained by orbital cycles and monsoon patterns, but perhaps, just perhaps, cosmic fire played its part. Imagine standing in the green Sahara 10 or 20,000 years ago. Grass stretches to the horizon, rivers wind through valleys, hippos wallow in shallow lakes. Then one day the sky ignites. A blazing object tears across the heavens, exploding with unimaginable force. Heat rolls outward, sand turns molten, animals flee in terror, forests ignite. In minutes, an Aden is scarred. Survivors watch the sky with new fear. Stories are born, stories of wrathful gods, of punishments from above, of deserts created by fire. These stories may have traveled far, Myths of fire from the sky appear not only in North Africa, but across cultures. The Greeks spoke of Phaethon, who tried to drive the chariot of the sun and scorched the earth before falling from the heavens. Biblical texts speak of cities destroyed in fire and brimstone. Indigenous traditions in the Americas recall stars that fell and burned the land. Could some of these tales share a common root, echoing real encounters with cosmic fire across the world? Libyan desert glass is thus not just a geological puzzle. It is a bridge between science and myth, between cosmic forces and human imagination. It reminds us that the Earth is vulnerable, that its surface can be reshaped in seconds by visitors from space. It also reminds us that memory does not always survive in fossils or stone. It sometimes endures as story, carried through generations until the original event is forgotten, but its shadow remains. Speculation dares us to ask one more question. What if such an event happened again? Asteroids still cross Earth's orbit. Airbursts still occur, though rarely on catastrophic scales. If a Tunguska-sized body exploded over the Sahara today, would it melt sand again, creating a new field of desert glass? Would it erase settlements, pipelines, and modern roads in an instant? Would it, once more, alter the balance of ecosystems, pushing the desert deeper into aridity? The mystery of desert glass is not confined to the past. It is a reminder of the future, a warning that the skies are never empty, that Earth remains a target in a universe alive with motion. The Sahara, in its silence, carries that warning in every shard of glass. And so, as we step forward in this journey, we leave behind the fire and return to the slow rhythms of climate. For even after cosmic catastrophes, it is the cycles of rain and drought, abundance and scarcity that decide the fate of landscapes. The Sahara's greatest transformation, the collapse into sand, awaits us on the horizon of this story. About 5,000 years ago, the Sahara reached a turning point. For millennia it had been green, alive with rivers, lakes, forests, and people. But then, slowly at first, and then with accelerating force, the rains began to weaken. The great African monsoon, driven by orbital cycles and the shifting tilt of the earth, retreated southward. What had been abundance began to wither. This was the moment when the Sahara collapsed into the desert we know today. Imagine standing by the shores of Lake Megachet during this time. The waterline that had stretched to the horizon is now shrinking, season by season, year by year. Fishermen who once cast nets into deep waters find only marshes. Families who built their homes near the lake watch the shoreline retreat into the distance, leaving cracked mud and brittle reeds. What had been a source of life becomes a memory, vanishing before their eyes. Rivers too dwindled. The mighty Taman Rasset, which may once have rivaled the Nile, began to fade. Its channels dried, its floodplains turned to dust. Crocodiles and hippos disappeared, their bones left behind in valleys where no water remained. Forests of acacia and tamarisk, once fed by rains, withered under a sun that grew harsher each year. Grasslands turned to scrub to sand. For humans, the change was devastating. Entire ways of life unraveled. Hunters could no longer rely on game that had vanished. Herders found their cattle starving on parched pastures. Farmers who once cultivated fertile lake shores saw their plots swallowed by desert. The green Sahara was not simply drying, it was expelling its people. And so began one of the great migrations in human prehistory. Families gathered their herds, packed what they could, and moved in search of water. Some drifted south toward the Sahel, where monsoon rains still fell. Others turned east toward the Nile, a river whose steady flow offered refuge even as the Sahara withered. Archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that this exodus reshaped the populations of North Africa, seeding new communities in fertile valleys while leaving the interior increasingly empty. Picture a caravan of families on the move, dust swirling in the air, children clutching clay pots, elders leaning on staffs, cattle stumbling along dry riverbeds. The memory of abundance still fresh, but the reality of scarcity pressing harder with each passing day. This was not a single migration, but a wave, unfolding over centuries, emptying the heart of the Sahara and pushing its people to the edges. The impact of this collapse cannot be overstated. It was not just the end of a landscape, but the end of a world. The rock art of the Sahara captures this shift. Early panels teem with giraffes, elephants, and lush grasses. Later ones are dominated by cattle, as people relied more heavily on herding. Then finally, the scenes fade, the paintings cease. The artists themselves were gone, driven from the land they once celebrated. Speculation allows us to glimpse their perspective. How did they interpret the drying of their world? Did they see it as punishment from the gods, as the withdrawal of divine favor? Did stories emerge of a paradise lost, of a fertile land turned barren by unseen forces? Could the myths of drowned or vanished lands, found across North Africa, echo not only floods but also the disappearance of the Green Sahara? The collapse also shaped history beyond the desert itself. As people gathered along the Nile, they brought with them traditions of cattle herding, farming, and water management honed in the Sahara. Some scholars argue that these migrants played a crucial role in the rise of Egyptian civilization, contributing skills and cultural practices that flourished in the Nile Valley. In this way, the death of the Green Sahara may have given birth to one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Yet the transition was not immediate. For generations, people likely clung to the desert margins, adapting to shrinking resources, watching the land change around them. Imagine the psychological toll. Grandparents who remembered a green world telling stories of rivers and forests to children who knew only dust. Oral traditions may have carried fragments of these memories, preserved as legends long after the land itself was lost. The desertification was not uniform. Pockets of life endured in isolated oases, sustained by underground aquifers. Some communities may have persisted for centuries, cultivating dates and grains, herding small flocks, holding out against the encroaching sands. These enclaves were like islands in a growing sea of desert, reminders of a world that was vanishing. But in the end, the Sahara triumphed. The Green Empire collapsed into sand, its rivers gone, its lakes evaporated, its people scattered. The transformation was so complete that for thousands of years afterward, the idea of a fertile Sahara seemed impossible to those who lived at its edges. Only in modern times, with satellite imagery and archaeology, have we begun to recover the truth that this desert was once alive. Speculation takes us further still. Could the collapse into sand have left deeper marks on humanity than we realize? Perhaps the experience of watching a world vanish shaped cultural memory in ways that echo through myths of loss and exile. Perhaps it instilled a resilience that carried into future civilizations, teaching people to adapt, to migrate, to endure. Perhaps even it left us with a subconscious reverence for deserts themselves, lands that remind us of fragility, of change, of the impermanence of abundance. The story of the Sahara's collapse is not only geological, it is human. It is about families forced to abandon homes, communities reshaped by migration, civilizations rising from the ashes of a dying landscape. It is about memory of what was lost and of how loss itself can give rise to new beginnings. And so, the Sahara's transformation from green to barren is not just an ecological shift. It is a turning point in the history of our species, a reminder that climate can shape destiny. Where there were rivers and forests, there is now sand. Where there were villages, there are now dunes. But the memory remains, buried deep, waiting to be uncovered by science, story, and imagination. As the rains faltered and the savannas withered, the empires and settlements of the green Sahara began to unravel. Communities that had once thrived on fertile floodplains or along the shores of vast lakes watched their foundations erode. The walls they built could not hold back the desert. The cattle pens emptied, the fields turned to dust, and slowly, inevitably, entire towns disappeared beneath advancing dunes. The collapse was not always sudden. For many it must have been a slow decline, a harvest that grew weaker year after year, wells that ran dry, rivers that trickled into silence. Families clung on, hoping the rains would return, performing rituals to summon storms, carving prayers into rock. But the monsoon had shifted, the cycle had turned, and one by one the settlements were abandoned. Archaeology gives us glimpses of this vanishing. In southern Algeria, Libya, Niger, and Chad, buried beneath layers of sand, researchers have found the remains of walled towns, cemeteries, and farms that once pulsed with life. Excavations reveal streets now empty, pottery, shards scattered where meals were once shared, skeletal remains lying in forgotten graves. These are not just ruins, they are absences. They are the outlines of lives interrupted, of societies undone by climate. In some places, the desert swallowed cities entirely. Shifting dunes can rise dozens of meters, engulfing buildings whole. To walk across the Sahara today is to walk above worlds unseen, towns preserved in silence, waiting to be rediscovered. Modern radar and satellite imaging have begun to reveal some of these hidden footprints, rectangular shapes beneath sand, lines that may have been roads, clusters of anomalies that suggest buried walls. What lies beneath is only beginning to be mapped. Yet even as the physical remains vanished, the memory endured. Across North Africa, oral traditions speak of vanished lands, drowned kingdoms, and deserts that were once alive. Tuareg legends tell of green valleys lost to sandstorms, of ancestors who wandered in search of water after their homeland disappeared. Berber stories recall cities swallowed overnight, their towers sinking into the dunes, their voices still echoing beneath the earth. These tales, passed down through generations, may be more than myth. They may be distorted memories of real collapses, preserved in story long after the land itself was lost. Speculation opens a doorway here. Could the Sahara's myths be fragments of ancient memory, echoing the great drying 5,000 years ago? Could the stories of lost oases, hidden kingdoms, and drowned lands be cultural fossils, carried through millennia as a way of remembering the trauma of desertification? When science and story are layered together, the possibility is tantalizing that myths are not fantasy, but history retold in symbolic language. Consider the parallel with Atlantis, the legendary island said to have vanished beneath the sea. While often dismissed as pure invention, some scholars suggest it may echo real memories of lost lands, such as the flooding of the Mediterranean basin or the collapse of Bronze Age cultures. In the Sahara, too, oral traditions may carry a kernel of truth, the memory of a time when rivers flowed and cities thrived before the sand claimed them. The abandoned empires of the Sahara also remind us of resilience. Though many settlements were lost, their people did not vanish. They migrated, carrying their skills, their cattle, their rituals, and their stories to new lands. Along the Nile, in the Sahel, and beyond, echoes of the Green Sahara live on in cultural practices, in genetic lineages, and in the persistence of desert myths. The desert did not erase them, it transformed them. Speculation invites us to imagine what might yet be found. Beneath dunes that stretch unbroken for hundreds of kilometers, there may lie entire towns preserved in stasis, walls intact, streets waiting, cemeteries untouched. Archaeologists armed with LIDAR and radar may one day uncover these buried worlds, peeling back the desert layer by layer. What will they find? Pottery painted with forgotten symbols, tools of copper and stone, temples dedicated to gods whose names have long been lost. The idea is haunting, that beneath the Sahara lies an archive of civilizations we have never heard of, that entire chapters of human history remain buried, their voices silenced not by war or conquest, but by climate, and that the myths of the desert, the stories of lands swallowed by sand, are not just allegories, but the faint memory of real worlds erased. In this way, the Sahara becomes both a destroyer and a preserver. It erases landscapes, but it also entombs them, sealing them away from erosion and time. What was abandoned is not necessarily gone. It is waiting, held in silence, until we are ready to uncover it. The story of abandoned empires is therefore not one of finality, but of dormancy. Civilizations may fall, but their traces remain. Memory persists, in stone, in sand, in story. And when the desert whispers of vanished lands, it may be telling us not only about the past, but about the fragility of our own present. For just as the Sahara shifted from green to barren, so too can other landscapes change, reshaping the destiny of those who live upon them. To think of the Sahara as empty is to misunderstand it. Even in its harshest phases, it has never truly been a void. And in its green ages, it was not a barrier at all. It was a crossroads. Far from isolating communities, the Sahara acted as a bridge, connecting the Mediterranean to sub-Saharan Africa, linking east to west, and weaving together cultures, goods, and ideas. During the Green Sahara periods, rivers carved through the landscape, lakes spread into inland seas, and savannas stretched horizon to horizon. These were not dead zones, but vibrant corridors. Herds of animals migrated across them, and with them came people, carrying language, tools, and traditions. The Sahara became a network of pathways, where trade was measured not in days, but in seasons, journeys spanning hundreds of kilometers across fertile plains. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture. Stone tools found deep in the Sahara match those from both North Africa and the Sahel, suggesting exchange between regions. Beads made from Mediterranean shells appear far inland, while obsidian from East Africa turns up thousands of kilometers away. The Sahara was not a wall, it was a thoroughfare, and the goods were only part of the story. Animals, too, traveled at these routes. Domesticated cattle, sheep, and goats moved across the Sahara, reshaping diets and economies. Crops spread as well: sorghum, millet, barley, carried by migrating peoples, adapted to new soils and climates. Genetic studies of plants and animals trace these movements, revealing how the Sahara functioned as a conveyor belt of biodiversity as much as of human culture. Perhaps most important of all were the ideas. Knowledge of herding, farming, pottery making, and ritual spread along these green corridors. Rock art echoes these exchanges. Styles and motifs appear across vast regions. linking cultures separated by thousands of kilometers. A spiral carved in one canyon may resemble a motif found hundreds of miles away, suggesting shared symbols, shared cosmologies. Pause and imagine standing on a Saharan plain 10,000 years ago. To the north, traders arrive with shells from the Mediterranean. To the south, others bring obsidian and ivory. To the east, perhaps, come migrants carrying crops. And in the center, people gather, not in isolated camps, but in marketplaces alive with voices, exchanging not only goods, but stories, songs, and beliefs. The Sahara was not a wilderness, it was a cultural highway. Even after the desertification began, the Sahara continued to connect rather than divide. Caravans of camels traversed its sands, carrying salt, gold, and slaves. Oases became waypoints in a vast network linking Timbuktu to Cairo, Marrakesh to Kano. Though harsher, the desert remained a bridge, its silence broken by the jingling of camel bells, its emptiness threaded by human determination. Speculation allows us to stretch this picture further. If the Sahara's green phases had lasted longer, could it have rivaled the Silk Road as one of history's great arteries of exchange? Could vast cities have risen not just along the Nile or the Mediterranean, but in the Sahara itself, capitals where north and south converged, where cultures fused, where new ideas of art, governance, and religion took shape? Consider how geography shapes history. The Mediterranean gave rise to Rome and Greece. The Nile nurtured Egypt. The Fertile Crescent birthed Mesopotamia. What if the Sahara, in its fertile state, had sustained cities of equal magnitude? Might we today speak of Saharan empires alongside those of the Tigris, the Euphrates, and the Indus? Might the desert itself have been remembered not as barren, but as a motherland of civilization? Even in its current form, the Sahara still serves as a bridge. The Tuareg, Fulani, and Berber peoples carry traditions that link north and south, echoes of ancient cultural exchanges. Music, languages, and oral histories reveal blended roots, proof that the desert does not only divide, it also binds. Its vastness challenges, but it does not sever. It weaves together, often invisibly, the destinies of the peoples who dwell at its edges. The Sahara as a cultural highway also reminds us of something deeper, that human beings are never truly isolated. Wherever there are paths, rivers, or corridors, we travel, we connect, we share. The Green Sahara was one of the greatest of these corridors, a place where landscapes invited movement rather than forbade it. Its memory lingers in the artifacts we find, the genetics we trace, the myths we inherit, and perhaps it lingers too in our imagination of deserts themselves. We see the Sahara as empty, but part of us knows it was once alive. We sense the buried rivers, the hidden cities, the lost highways beneath the dunes, and in that sensing we glimpse not only the past, but the possibility that what was once a bridge could be again. As the Sahara dried and its people dispersed, many turned toward one of the last dependable sources of water in North Africa, the Nile. This great river, fed by rains far to the south and sustained by annual floods, offered something the collapsing Sahara could not: stability. But the people who arrived at its banks did not come empty-handed. They carried with them knowledge, traditions, and practices shaped in the savannas and lake shores of the Green Sahara. In doing so, they may have helped seed the rise of one of the most enduring civilizations in human history, ancient Egypt. Archaeological evidence supports this migration. Excavations in the Nile Valley have uncovered stone tools, pottery styles, and burial practices that closely resembled those of the Saharan Neolithic. Rock art depicting cattle and herding in the Sahara predates similar imagery in the Nile, suggesting that cattle domestication and pastoral culture developed first in the desert before spreading eastward. Some of the earliest Nile communities show a surprising familiarity with herding and agriculture, skills that could have been imported by migrants who had already mastered them during the Sahara's green phases. Genetic studies add another layer to the story. Analysis of ancient remains suggest connections between early Nile Valley populations and groups from the Sahara and the Sahel. This genetic blending hints at waves of migration from the west, likely driven by the desertification that forced people to abandon their homelands. These movements did not just add numbers to the Nile Valley. They added ideas, techniques, and cultural traditions that enriched the foundation of Egyptian society. Picture the scene along the river thousands of years ago. The Nile's floodplains are wide and fertile, its waters rising and falling with seasonal regularity. Into this environment come families who once lived by shrinking Saharan lakes. They bring cattle, accustomed to the care and ritual importance developed over centuries in the desert. They bring seeds of millet and sorghum, knowledge of pottery and food storage, traditions of communal living honed in the oases and grasslands. To the Nile's indigenous communities, these newcomers may have been both neighbors and innovators, introducing practices that would transform subsistence into surplus and surplus into civilization. The echoes of Saharan culture linger in Egypt's symbols. The reverence for cattle, so prominent in Saharan rock art, finds its counterpart in Egyptian religion, where bulls were sacred, associated with gods of fertility and strength. The earliest Egyptian deities linked to cattle may trace their origins to Saharan traditions, carried eastward by herders long before the pyramids rose. The fusion of these beliefs with local Nile cosmologies produced the distinctive religious landscape of Egypt, one that continued to honor cattle for millennia. Agriculture, too, may owe part of its Nile success to Saharan migrants. While the Nile's floods provided rich silt, the techniques for managing herds, cultivating grains, and storing surplus may have been inherited from desert societies that had long balanced abundance and scarcity. In this sense, the collapse of the Sahara was not simply a loss, it was a transfer, a redirection of cultural energy into a new landscape where it could flourish. Speculation invites a haunting question. Would Egypt have existed at all without the collapse of the Sahara? If the desert had remained green, if rivers and lakes had endured, perhaps the great civilizations of Africa would have grown in the Sahara itself, not along the Nile. The drying of the desert forced a migration that concentrated people and ideas along one of the world's most fertile rivers. In that crucible of necessity and opportunity, Egypt was born. Without the collapse, the Nile might have remained a river of villages, rather than the backbone of a global empire. Imagine an alternate history in which the Sahara never dried. Vast cities might have risen around Lake Megachad, capitals of kingdoms sustained by inland seas and river highways. The Nile, while fertile, might never have achieved primacy. Instead, the Sahara itself could have been the center of African civilization, remembered today as the cradle of empire. In this light, Egypt's rise was not inevitable. It was contingent, born from the loss of another world. This perspective transforms how we understand Egypt. Rather than an isolated miracle of the Nile, it becomes part of a larger story of climate, migration, and adaptation. The pyramids, the temples, the hieroglyphs, all of these may carry echoes of Saharan traditions, refracted through the lens of the Nile. The collapse of one landscape became the foundation of another, a reminder that civilizations do not emerge from nothing. They are built on layers of memory, migration, and adaptation. And perhaps this is why the Sahara lingers in Egyptian myth. The desert was not only Egypt's western neighbor, it was its ancestor, a place where many of its cultural seeds were sown. Even as the Sahara became barren, Egypt may have carried its memory forward in sacred bulls, in agricultural practices, in the very idea that abundance must be managed carefully, for it is never guaranteed. The story of Saharan migrants shaping Egypt is also a story of resilience. It shows that when landscapes collapse, humans do not simply vanish. They move, they adapt, they carry knowledge with them. The Green Sahara may have died, but in its death it gave life to one of humanity's most extraordinary civilizations. For centuries, the Sahara seemed like an impenetrable enigma, a vast sea of sand where nothing survived, where history itself was erased. But in recent decades, technology has begun to peel back the desert's disguise. With the aid of satellites, radar, and remote sensing, scientists have started to uncover what the naked eye cannot see: the ghostly outlines of rivers, lakes, and aquifers hidden beneath the dunes. The Sahara, it turns out, still carries the fingerprints of its green ages, preserved beneath the silence of sand. It began with faint lines noticed in satellite imagery. In places where the desert should have been featureless, subtle ridges and channels appeared. At first they seemed like illusions, tricks of light and shadow, but radar, capable of penetrating sand, revealed something extraordinary. Beneath the dunes lay the beds of ancient rivers, some stretching for hundreds, even thousands of kilometers. These were not small streams. Some rivaled the great rivers of the world, vast arteries that once carried life across the Sahara. One of the most striking discoveries is the Tamanrasset River system, a buried giant that once drained a catchment as large as the Amazon. In its green ages, this river flowed westward, carrying water from the highlands of Central Africa all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. Its channels, now dry, lie concealed under dunes, but their scale speaks of a time when the Sahara was not desert, but a fertile plain of waterways. To imagine the Tamanrasset alive is to imagine the Sahara as a land of abundance, where rivers linked deep interiors to distant seas. Other discoveries followed. Radar has revealed networks of tributaries, floodplains, and deltas, all long buried but still etched into the subsurface. Fossil aquifers, vast underground reservoirs of water left behind by wetter climates, have been mapped beneath Libya, Algeria, and Chad. These aquifers are the remnants of ancient rainfall, sealed away for millennia, waiting beneath the sands. In some cases, wells drilled today tap into these hidden reserves, drawing water that last fell as rain tens of thousands of years ago. The scale is staggering. Beneath the Sahara lie lakes larger than some modern seas, frozen not in ice but in invisible storage. The Nubian sandstone aquifer system, for example, spans Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Chad, holding more fresh water than all the rivers on earth combined. It is a reminder that deserts are not always what they seem, that beneath aridity lies abundance, concealed but not erased. These discoveries transform our understanding of the Sahara. The rivers and aquifers are not just geological curiosities, they are memory. They are the fossilized traces of worlds long gone, a map of past landscapes written into the earth itself. When scientists trace these channels, they are retracing the paths of elephants, hippos, and human migrations. Each buried river is a corridor of history, a reminder that the Sahara has always been dynamic, shifting between extremes of fertility and barrenness. Speculation invites us to consider the implications. If rivers like the Tamanrasset were still flowing today, what kind of civilizations might have risen along their banks? Would the Sahara be home to cities as grand as those on the Nile or the Euphrates? Could its inland seas have supported fleets of boats carrying trade across the continent? The rivers that lie hidden now might once have been highways of commerce, their disappearance erasing entire possibilities of history. And what of the aquifers? Today, countries like Libya and Egypt tap into them through massive engineering projects, drawing on water that has been sealed beneath the desert since the last Green Sahara. Libya's Great Man-Made River Project, one of the largest infrastructure projects in the world, pumps this fossil water across thousands of kilometers to irrigate farmland and sustain cities. In a sense, modern technology is resurrecting the memory of the Green Sahara, coaxing its hidden water back to the surface, but the aquifers are finite. They do not refill easily, for the rains that created them are gone. To draw from them is to drink from the past, to sip water that fell when mammoths still roamed and humans painted cattle on Saharan rocks. Each well is a link to a vanished age, and each drop reminds us of the fragility of this hidden resource. The use of satellites has also sparked new hope for archaeology. By mapping subsurface anomalies, scientists can identify sites where buried settlements may lie. Already, radar has revealed the outlines of lost riverbanks where ancient peoples once lived, guiding excavations that uncover tools, pottery, and bones. Entire landscapes of prehistory are being remapped, not by shovels but by eyes in the sky. Imagine what this means for the future of exploration. The Sahara, long thought to be empty, may prove to be one of the richest archives of human history on the planet. Cities, farms, and cemeteries lie beneath dunes, preserved by sand, waiting for rediscovery. Each buried river channel is not only a record of climate, but a guide to where people once gathered. The desert may yet reveal a network of civilizations we have barely begun to imagine. Speculation stretches further still. Could modern science not only uncover the Sahara's past, but also shape its future? If we can map aquifers and rivers, could we one day regreen parts of the desert, restoring landscapes that once thrived? Could technology resurrect what climate cycles erased, bringing water to dunes, fields to wastelands, and cities to silence? The Sahara's buried rivers may be more than memory. They may be the seeds of a possible future, and so the Sahara, once thought dead, proves to be alive with hidden motion. Its veins still flow, though invisibly. Its lakes still exist, though buried. Its rivers still wind across the land, though covered by sand. With satellites, we are learning to see the invisible, to read the desert not as emptiness, but as archive, as map, as memory. If the Sahara once bloomed with rivers and lakes, can it bloom again? For centuries, this question was left to myth and imagination. But in recent decades, engineers, scientists, and dreamers have begun to test whether technology can bring back a fraction of what climate cycles erased. Across North Africa and the Sahel, projects both massive and experimental have tried to coax life from sand. Their successes and failures speak to humanity's restless desire to reshape landscapes, to undo in some way the collapse that turned green empire into desert. Perhaps the most ambitious effort has been Libya's Great Man-Made River Project. Begun in the 1980s, it was an audacious attempt to turn fossil water buried deep beneath the Sahara into a resource for modern life. Engineers drilled thousands of wells into the Nubian sandstone aquifer, tapping reserves of fresh water that had lain sealed beneath the desert since the last humid period. From these wells, a vast network of underground pipes stretching thousands of kilometers was built to carry the water northward toward Libya's coastal cities and farmlands. At its peak, the project moved over 6 million cubic meters of water per day. In a sense, it resurrected the memory of the Green Sahara, bringing its ancient rains back to the surface to irrigate fields and sustain life. Crops grew in places where none had been possible. Cities like Tripoli and Benghazi drank water that had fallen when the Sahara was savanna. It was as if the desert itself was being asked to return a fragment of its former abundance, but the water is finite. Fossil aquifers do not refill on human timescales. Every drop pumped to the surface is a drop gone forever. Critics argue that the great man-made river is not sustainable, that it consumes a non-renewable resource for short-term gain. Yet for decades it has provided proof that the Sahara's hidden reservoirs can sustain modern life. It is both a triumph of engineering and a cautionary tale, a reminder that resurrecting the past may mean exhausting it. Beyond Libya, other efforts have taken different forms. Along the southern edge of the desert in the Sahel, scientists and communities are experimenting with regreening projects designed to halt desertification. The most famous of these is the Great Green Wall Initiative, an ambitious plan to create a belt of trees and vegetation stretching across the continent from Senegal in the west to Djibouti in the east. The vision is to restore degraded lands, capture carbon, and provide livelihoods to millions of people threatened by advancing sands. Progress has been uneven, but where projects succeed, they transform lives. Villages once abandoned to dust storms have seen crops return. Families cultivate millet and sorghum again, protected by new trees that stabilize soil and bring shade. Regreening does not restore the Sahara of 10,000 years ago, but it hints at what human persistence can achieve. With careful planning, deserts can be pushed back, if only at their margins. Other experiments are more futuristic. Scientists have proposed covering parts of the Sahara with solar panels, generating electricity on a continental scale while altering the desert's albedo, its reflectivity. In theory, this could increase rainfall, triggering small-scale greening effects. Others suggest vast irrigation schemes, desalinating seawater and pumping it inland to create artificial rivers and lakes. These ideas remain speculative, but they reveal a growing fascination with the possibility that technology could coax the Sahara into a new cycle, not by waiting for orbital rhythms, but by human design. Speculation takes us deeper still. What if the Sahara could be systematically regreened, not at its edges but across its core? Imagine vast plantations watered by solar-powered desalination plants along the Mediterranean coast. Imagine aquifers carefully managed, their ancient waters used to seed new ecosystems rather than exhausted in a single generation. Imagine cities rising where dunes now stand, built around artificial lakes, connected by green corridors of crops and forests. Could such a project not only reshape Africa, but alter the global climate itself? The vision is both hopeful and unsettling. On the one hand, regreening the Sahara could feed millions, stabilize weather, and provide new farmland in a world struggling with climate change. On the other, it raises profound ethical questions. Do we have the right to remake a desert that has been shaped by cycles far older than humanity? What would be lost if we erased the Sahara's silence, its unique ecosystems, its role in global dust circulation? To green the Sahara may solve some problems while creating others we cannot yet foresee. And yet the dream persists, because beneath it lies something more than engineering. It is a longing to reconnect with the green Sahara, to restore what was lost, to reverse the collapse into sand. It is a dream rooted in memory, in myths of vanished lands, in the knowledge that this desert was once alive. In this way, modern attempts to revive the Sahara are not only scientific, they are mythic. They are our generation's echo of ancient prayers for rain, amplified by technology. Where our ancestors painted cattle on stone walls, hoping the herds would thrive, we build pipelines and plant trees, hoping the desert will yield again. Both are acts of faith. Both are acts of defiance against the inevitability of drought. Speculation dares us to imagine the ultimate outcome, a future in which the Sahara is no longer desert, but empire once more. A second green Sahara, not born of orbital cycles, but of human will. Cities rising along newly flowing rivers, lakes shimmering where dunes once stood. Forests spreading across 9 million square kilometers of what is now sand. The Sahara reborn, not as it was, but as we have chosen to make it. Whether this future will ever come to pass is uncertain, but the attempt itself reveals something profound about humanity. We are not content to accept deserts as eternal. We search for buried rivers, we tap hidden aquifers, we plant trees against the wind. We try to remake what time has taken away. In doing so, we remind ourselves that landscapes are never fixed, that deserts too can change, and that perhaps one day the Sahara may bloom again. If science uncovers the Sahara's hidden rivers and buried cities, then myth preserves its lost landscapes in story. Among the Berber, Tuareg, and other desert peoples, traditions linger that speak of vanished lands, drowned kingdoms, and cities swallowed by the sand. These are not the myths of distant strangers, they are the stories of those who live within the Sahara's silence, who walk its dunes and feel its weight every day. And in their tales, we may glimpse cultural memories of the green Sahara, echoes of real civilizations now lost beneath the desert. Tuareg legends, passed orally for generations, tell of oases that vanished overnight, swallowed by storms of sand. Whole communities are said to have disappeared, their voices silenced, their dwellings entombed. Some stories speak of towers sinking beneath dunes, their tops still visible in certain seasons, as if the desert shifts just enough to reveal a fragment of what it has hidden. For the Tuareg, these are not abstract myths, but warnings, reminders that the desert is alive and restless, capable of erasing as swiftly as it sustains. Berber traditions offer similar tales. There are stories of once green valleys now barren, of rivers that dried while people wept, of kings whose arrogance angered the gods, leading their cities to be buried. In these myths, moral lessons intertwine with memory. The collapse of landscapes becomes a story of hubris and consequence, but beneath the allegory may lie recollections of real climatic shifts, of communities forced to abandon homes as the Sahara turned against them. Even Arabic chronicles, written long after the desert had hardened, preserve hints of earlier stories. Medieval geographers described ruined cities in the interior, their origins unknown, their builders forgotten. Travelers spoke of ghost towns seen from afar, mirages, or perhaps glimpses of actual ruins exposed by shifting sand. These accounts blur history and imagination, but they reveal a persistent belief that the Sahara was once more than it appears, that under its silence lies a buried world. Speculation allows us to ask, are these stories cultural fossils? Could they encode distant memories of the green Sahara's collapse, carried through countless generations until the historical details blurred into legend. Oral traditions often preserve kernels of truth long after events are forgotten. Myths of great floods echo the end of ice ages. Stories of fire from the sky may recall ancient meteor strikes. Might the Sahara's desert myths be another such echo? Fragments of memory wrapped in narrative and ritual? The parallels are striking. The Tuaregs speak of drowned lands, stories that mirror global myths of deluges and lost worlds. The Berbers tell of vanished cities, legends that resonate with tales of Atlantis or the biblical cities swallowed by divine wrath. What if these similarities are not coincidence, but signs that different cultures are remembering the same kinds of losses, shaped by different landscapes, but born of the same experience, the sudden disappearance of abundance? Consider what it would have been like to live through the Sahara's collapse, to watch rivers vanish, lakes retreat, herds die, and forests wither. Such trauma would leave deep marks on collective memory. For those who survived, the stories they told their children might not have been about rainfall cycles and orbital mechanics. They would have been stories of God's curses and punishments, narratives that gave meaning to loss and taught future generations to respect the fragility of life in the desert. Over time, the scientific reality would fade, but the myth would endure. These stories are not just echoes of grief. They are also maps of possibility. When Tuareg legends speak of hidden cities beneath dunes, archaeologists take note. When Berber tales describe fertile valleys now gone, scientists consider whether they point to real ancient riverbeds or oases. Oral traditions have guided discoveries before. In other parts of the world, myths led researchers to volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and even archaeological sites. Why not here in the Sahara, where so much remains hidden? Speculation stretches further. Could the myths of the Sahara have traveled beyond its sands, carried by migrants who fled its collapse? If Saharan peoples moved to the Nile, to the Sahel, to the Mediterranean coast, might they have carried with them stories of lost lands and vanished kingdoms? And if so, might those stories have fused with local traditions, eventually contributing to global myths of drowned worlds, divine punishments, and deserts born of catastrophe? The Sahara, in this view, becomes not only a landscape of memory, but a source of mythic imagination. Its silence and vastness, its ability to erase entire civilizations, give it a power that transcends geography. For those who live at its edges, it is not just a desert, it is a reminder of time's cruelty, a teacher of humility, a symbol of how fragile abundance can be. And yet, myths also keep hope alive. For if the desert can swallow cities, perhaps it can also return them. Some Tuareg legends speak of the day when the dunes will shift, when hidden towers will rise again, when rivers will flow once more. These are not predictions in a scientific sense, but they reflect a deep intuition that the Sahara is not fixed, that its story is cyclical, that what was once green may be green again. In this way, myth and science converge. Science tells us the Sahara will bloom again in 10 to 15,000 years, when orbital cycles shift and monsoons return. Myth tells us that lost cities still wait beneath the sand, that rivers will flow once more, that abundance is not gone forever but merely hidden. Both speak to the same truth. The desert is not eternal. It is a landscape in motion, a place where memory, story, and cycle are all intertwined. And so, when we listen to the stories of the Berber, the Tuareg, and others who carry the desert in their veins, we are not only hearing myth, we are hearing history, refracted through imagination, preserved in words when stones were buried. We are hearing the voices of those who lived through the collapse of a world, who sought to make sense of it, and who passed that sense forward so that the desert itself would not be forgotten. The myths of the Sahara do not stand alone. Across the world, cultures have preserved tales of vanished lands, drowned kingdoms, and divine punishments that reshaped the earth. When we place Saharan traditions beside these global narratives, patterns emerge, patterns that suggest humanity shares a deep memory of landscapes lost, catastrophes endured, and worlds erased. It is possible that the Sahara's collapse, with all its trauma and migration, fed into this larger pool of myth, its echoes carried far beyond the dunes by those who fled its drying heart. One of the most famous parallels is Atlantis, the lost island described by Plato. In his dialogues, Atlantis was a great civilization that fell out of favor with the gods and was destroyed in a single day and night, swallowed by the sea. For centuries, scholars have debated whether Plato's tale was allegory, invention, or a memory of real events. Some have even speculated that Atlantis could be linked to North Africa, perhaps inspired by stories of Saharan civilizations buried under sand or drowned by vanished lakes. The symmetry is striking: a world destroyed, its cities lost, remembered only in fragments of story. The biblical flood is another echo. In the book of Genesis, waters rise to cover the earth, sparing only Noah and his ark. Similar flood stories appear in Mesopotamian epics, in Greek myths, and in traditions as far afield as India and the Americas. Scholars often connect these to post-glacial sea level rise, when coastlines drowned around the world. But might some of these stories also encode the memory of Sahara's lakes swelling and then vanishing, of lands oscillating between abundance and loss? For a people whose survival depended on water, the sudden retreat of a great lake would have felt like a cosmic punishment, a flood in reverse. Desert prophecies, too, appear across traditions. In Jewish, Christian, and Islamic texts, the wilderness is often described as a place of testing, punishment, or transformation. Prophets wandered into deserts to confront the divine, while entire peoples are condemned to wander barren lands as penance. These images resonated deeply with the reality of the Sahara's collapse, when green lands were taken and deserts expanded. It is easy to imagine that the memory of the Sahara's transformation infused these religious imaginations, shaping the desert as a symbol of both danger and revelation. Speculation allows us to connect the dots more boldly. When Saharan peoples migrated to the Nile, to the Sahel, to the Mediterranean, they carried not only cattle and seeds, but also stories. Their children inherited tales of rivers that dried, cities that vanished, lands that betrayed their people. Over generations, those stories blended with local traditions, reshaping into myths of floods, divine punishments, and lost civilizations. By the time they were written down, their origins were obscured, but the memory of the Sahara lived on in disguised form. Consider how myths migrate like seeds. A story told around a fire in the Fezzan could, through centuries of retelling, become a story told along the Nile. From the Nile, it could travel to the Levant, woven into oral traditions that later informed written scripture. Meanwhile, other fragments could travel west, carried into Berber oral traditions that survived into Islamic chronicles. Still others may have drifted south, merging with Sahelian myths of fire and drought. In this way, the Sahara's transformation could have seeded a family of myths across continents, each carrying a trace of its origin. The global resonance of these stories suggests that memory of catastrophe is universal. Humanity has always lived at the mercy of climate and cosmos. We remember floods, fires, famines, and plagues not just in bones and ruins, but in myths. The Sahara's transformation was one of the greatest environmental shifts in human prehistory, and it is hard to imagine that its memory would not ripple outward, shaping narratives in places far beyond its boundaries. Speculation invites an even larger question. Did the Sahara play a role in shaping humanity's archetypes of paradise and exile? In so many traditions, there is a story of a lost garden, a world of abundance destroyed, leaving humanity to wander deserts or toil in harsher lands. The Garden of Eden, the Isles of the Blessed, the happy fields of Greek myth, all echo a nostalgia for a world once fertile, now gone. Could these myths, at least in part, be distant memories of the Green Sahara, remembered not as a desert, but as a paradise lost? If so, the Sahara is not just a desert in Africa. It is a chapter of the human subconscious, written into myths across cultures. Its drying shaped not only migrations and civilizations, but also the stories we tell about loss, exile, and the hope of restoration. The Tuareg legend of cities under sand, Plato's Atlantis swallowed by sea, the Bible's floodwaters, the Quran's barren deserts, all may be variations on the same theme, the memory of a world that vanished, the longing for a world that might return. The desert itself seems to encourage such myths. Its silence feels like absence. Its vastness invites imagination. To walk across dunes is to feel that something is missing, that life was once here and could be again. Myths fill that silence with meaning, turning emptiness into story, erasure into memory, and in doing so, they connect us not only to the Sahara, but to the broader human experience of landscapes in flux. And so, the Sahara may be one of the greatest sources of global myth, its cycles of abundance and collapse shaping not just African traditions, but stories told across the world. Through migration, memory, and imagination, its voice echoes in Atlantis, in flood myths, in prophecies of deserts and gardens lost. It reminds us that myths are not mere fantasies. They are vessels of history, carrying fragments of truth across oceans of time. The Sahara may appear eternal, its dunes fixed under the sun, its silence unbroken for millennia. Yet science tells us this desert is not finished changing. Just as it was once green, it will be green again. The rhythms that govern its cycles are vast, measured not in centuries, but in tens of thousands of years, written in the slow dance of Earth around the sun. These are the Milankovitch cycles, subtle variations in our planet's orbit and tilt that determine how much sunlight reaches different latitudes. And through them, the Sahara's future has already been foretold. Every 20,000 to 25,000 years, the tilt and wobble of Earth combine to shift the intensity of the African monsoon. When the northern hemisphere leans closer to the sun during summer, monsoon rains surge farther north, reaching deep into the Sahara. Grasslands spread, rivers flow, and lakes swell. When the tilt shifts back, the rains retreat, leaving the desert to reclaim the land. These cycles explain the Sahara's green ages of the past, and they predict another green age yet to come. According to paleoclimate models, the Sahara should bloom again in roughly 10,000 to 15,000 years. Monsoon rains will return, flooding dry valleys, refilling ancient lakes, and transforming dunes into savannas. The fossil rivers mapped by satellites may flow once more, carrying water to the Atlantic. Lake Megachad, now a fraction of its former size, could again spread like an inland sea. The desert we know will vanish, replaced by grass, trees, and life. But there is a complication. Human activity has entered the equation. The Sahara's cycles have always been driven by orbital rhythms, yet today the atmosphere itself is changing at a rate far faster than cosmic mechanics. Rising levels of carbon dioxide released from fossil fuels are altering temperature and rainfall patterns across the globe. Climate scientists debate how this will affect the Sahara's next transition. Some models suggest higher CO2 could accelerate greening, enhancing rainfall and vegetation. Others warn it could disrupt monsoon systems, delaying or even preventing the return of abundance. Already, we see hints of change. In recent decades, satellite imagery has revealed patches of greening along the southern edges of the Sahara. In the Sahel, rainfall has increased in some regions, allowing shrubs and grasses to return. Some scientists believe this may be an early sign of a larger shift, a preview of the Sahara's ability to respond rapidly when conditions align. If so, the desert is not as stable as it appears. It is ready to tip, waiting for the right push. Speculation opens a fascinating possibility. Could humans themselves become agents in the Sahara's cycles? For the first time in history, we possess technologies capable of altering climate at regional or even global scales. Projects of geoengineering, though still controversial, propose ways to increase rainfall, capture carbon, or redirect weather. If the Sahara is destined to bloom in 10,000 years, could we make it bloom sooner? Could humanity choose to accelerate a natural cycle, reshaping the desert not through myth or prayer, but through deliberate design? The implications are staggering. Imagine global initiatives to regreen the Sahara, combining orbital inevitability with technological intervention. Solar farms altering albedo, artificial lakes fed by desalinated seawater, vast belts of vegetation seeded by drones. In such a scenario, the Sahara could become a deliberate climate engine, cooling the planet, feeding millions, and reshaping ecosystems across Africa. Yet there are dangers. The Sahara's role in the Earth system is complex. Its dust, carried by winds across the Atlantic, fertilizes the Amazon rainforest and nourishes oceans with vital minerals. To erase the desert entirely would mean disrupting these cycles, with consequences we cannot yet predict. The Sahara is not just absence, it is function, a player in the global web of life. To green it too quickly or without care could trade one balance for another, creating unforeseen risks. Still, the vision endures, because it is written into the Sahara's destiny. Whether accelerated by human hands or guided by orbital mechanics alone, the desert will not remain as it is. Its silence is temporary. Its dunes are a pause, not an ending. The Sahara breathes in cycles of abundance and scarcity, and it is only in our short human timescale that we mistake its current state for permanence. Speculation dares us to imagine what that next green age will look like. Will it be wild, with elephants and hippos returning to new rivers, their migrations guided by instincts older than memory? Will it be human-made, with engineered forests and artificial lakes? Or will it be something in between, a blend of nature's rhythms and human design, a collaboration between orbital cycles and technological ambition? Whatever the answer, one truth is clear. The Sahara is not finished. Its story is not yet written. Beneath its sand lie rivers ready to flow, aquifers waiting to rise, seeds lying dormant in the soil. The desert holds within it the blueprint of its own renewal, awaiting only the tilt of the earth or the hand of humanity to awaken it. The Sahara was not always what we see today. It was once a land of rivers and lakes, of hippos basking in shallows and giraffes walking through grasslands. It was a cradle for the first herders, a stage for kingdoms that rose where survival seemed impossible, and a canvas for myths that traveled across the world. It was a place where fire fell from the sky, where empires thrived and were abandoned, where memory was buried but not erased. And it may be such a place again. If the greatest desert on earth could once have been a green empire, alive with cities, trade, and culture, then what else might be hidden in plain sight? What other forgotten landscapes lie beneath our feet? What other civilizations lie waiting beneath oceans, tundras, or jungles? How much of human history is not lost but simply buried, waiting for us to listen, to look, to uncover? And so we end where we began, not in certainty but in wonder, for when the sun sets over the Sahara, the dunes glow gold, and then fade into shadow. Stars rise above the horizon, cold and sharp, while the desert lies still, yet beneath that silence, deep under the dunes, the ghostly rivers of the Sahara still carve their courses. They do not flow with water, but with memory. Invisible, unyielding, they remind us that no desert is eternal, and that what we call emptiness is often the greatest archive of all.